Ladies and gentlemen, this is John Weathersby, the originator and still champion president of the Open Source Software Institute, OSSI, headquartered in Mississippi. And he spends a lot of his life getting the Navy and other government institutions to use open source software. And he does it with a pretty fair amount of success, a surprising and enviable amount of success, and he brings paid work to free and open source software developers. We like that a lot. So John, okay, we can get your history and mission statement off the link that I'll throw in the text thing with this. But so tell me, what's the deal? It's been a long time. Why is there still pushback? Why haven't they all just openly adopted open source flat out?
Well, Robin, like you said, I've been in the business for a long time. I started working specifically helping to integrate open source within the Department of Defense. Specifically, we started off with U.S. Navy back in 2000. And we've come a long way, but we still have a long way to go from a purely open source perspective. And a lot of that, I believe, just has to do with two things. Number one is culture, and number two is money. So the Department of Defense, or any large organization within, in my case, a government, federal government, things move slowly. So it's taken a long time, but they've got all the pieces in place now. We in the open source world are used to moving very quickly. We're by our very nature, we're agile. And that's just not the case when it comes to government acquisition. That's what we're talking about more than anything else. It's not the development or the implementation of code or programs, it's the acquisition component, because that's what it comes down to them. How do you officially move something into a program? And hence the money aspect. The open source component or free software flies right in the face of a lot of the existing defense contracting business models. And it is easier to say, no, what was your question, than to say, this is where the world is going, how do we get involved? So it's happening. We're going to win the war, if you will, but it just seems like it's moving slowly, I think, to us.
Now, you talk about the open source business model and antithetical. That sounds sadly like something somebody told me at a meeting about open source in the third, fourth, fifth world, whatever. And this guy is saying, well, in Africa where he lives, in some of the countries, what happens is the compensation, the fees, the commissions, we won't say bribes, are dependent on how much whatever it is costs. So there's no money in free software. And
well, you know, the other side of that coin is that in the United States, we have the luxury of having a lot of money to invest in things. And in a lot of places around the world, they don't have the budgets that we have traditionally have. So they've had to solve problems other ways. And the other ways, open source has been a boon for them because they're able to go in and actually get things done without these fees that you said. And,
yes.
And it's just different business models. So, you know, there's an old saying that if it pays, it plays. That you're not going to change that. You're not going to change it. But on the other hand, open source software, free software, has demonstrated its inherent value through its flexibility, its the scalability, all the things that we know. So we're here. I mean, we're part of the equation now. That's that was one of the big things within the government, the DoD market, is a few years ago we looked up and realized, hey, you know, we kind of won. So now what? So a lot of the entities, like you know, my organization, you said the Open Source Software Institute. I started the Open Source Software Institute. I actually turned it over to another group that people that helped me build it. I turned that over in 2013, so it's 2016 now. So about 3 years ago, I turned that over and started another organization called the Open Technology Center, because we look at things from not just software, it's the acquisition, it's the implementation, because open source software is essentially about a license agreement. So we're trying to look at it whole cloth. Open source brings so much more to the table than just code. Code is the essence, but it's how you do things through collaboration, through innovation, by standing on the shoulders of people before you. It's something that I just feel is intuitive. To me, it is. It just makes sense. It's always rung true. So that's why I was able to personally get behind it. And if you're a traditional software salesperson, I can see where you can easily view free and open source software as from the devil. Understand. From their perspective, I can understand it. But from our perspective, from a coding perspective, it obviously works. And from a business model perspective, they've demonstrated that it works very well also. I mean, again, the biggest example, look at Red Hat. I was listening to radio the other day. It was actually public radio. You should be happy with me that I'm listening to public radio. And Red Hat was, one of the big advertisers on there. And I couldn't help but chuckle to think how far we've all come from the early days when you'd go in, Red Hat's some of their original office buildings where the rooms were named after board games. And, now they are a truly big company, and I'm proud of them. On the other hand, look at some of the entities that have acquired open source assets and how it hasn't worked so well because it's counter to their culture. So it's an environment. You've got all these different competing motivations and objectives and cultures. And I try not to look at it as just one or the other. You and I always banter back and forth about politics and life things. It's a matter of I respect your opinion, you respect mine, and we learn from each other. I see the same thing in business and in software development. So from our perspective, we go in and we tell folks open source can be a great asset to you. Let's find out where it fits in your equation, not open source or nothing, or proprietary or nothing. It's not a zero-sum game.
Okay, now wait. I have to do a disclosure here. People watching this, John Weathersby and I have known each other for many years.
Long time.
Long time. And politically, when we hit a point of agreement, it's so rare that we both have a tendency to faint.
It could be because we're usually sitting in a pub somewhere, so the fainting, hey, look.
Or we're on Facebook more commonly.
We're on Facebook.
We live, it's in the world of remote life. But we have great political arguments, and they're not the kind where we haul guns out. We both own guns. We don't do that. We just talk. And we're
but it's the same thing in life. Is no one is completely right, so you always.
Well, I'm completely right.
Okay, you're completely right. But in the way that we try to address advocating for open source within government entities is not open source is right and you need to adopt it. It is you've got a problem, you've got a challenge. You've got a pain point. Let us see if we can apply an open source solution, a free and open source solution to address that, because nobody's going to pay you to fix what isn't broken. So all the projects that we go in and look at, I just want to know what doesn't work, because that's where we begin. And I think that's why we've been successful. If it does work, like some of the projects within the Navy. Right now, we're doing a lot of work. We have been for several years with Homeland Security, and now with different entities within the Department of Defense, not just the Navy. We work with all the branches. I want to know what isn't working, and then we go try to find some of the brilliant people in our world, in the open source world, that can simply fix it.
And wait, you're moving into, I see another thing, that Open Technology Center thing. You guys are getting really involved in autonomous vehicles of various types, aren't you?
Yes, we're quiet. Most of the things that we do, we move into quietly. A few years ago, let me go back. The guy that is kind of my sponsor, my mentor, if you will, within the Department of Homeland Security, is a big open source advocate in that he understands the intrinsic value. So he doesn't push open source, but he allows me and our teams to go seek out opportunities. So he looks through a cybersecurity lens. So anything that we do has to be A, address open source, how we can eventually get to it, and B, how can we enhance the cyber footing, the cybersecurity footing for any project we touch. We were involved with helping the OpenSSL project move into what's called FIPS validation, which is
I remember that, yes.
Okay, so trying to explain to people and essentially sell people on the idea, addressing issues of cryptography and free software, that's a tough sell. I mean, because people they just don't seem to go together. We know they do. But in trying to explain this one day, I realized that we were getting a lot of north-south with the head nod, but, you know, the lights were on, but nobody was home. So we changed the discussion and said, well, what about this burgeoning unmanned vehicle market? What do you mean? Well, everybody likes UAVs. Everybody likes drones, right? You know, the market's about to explode. And this was 5 or 6 years ago. Oh, yeah, that's great. Okay, well, let's look at cybersecurity through the perspective of you've got all these vehicles, which are simply delivery mechanism. We refer to them as platforms, whether it's an airplane or a quadcopter or, in fact, we look at aerial and terrestrial and maritime systems. The way you get the machine that puts the sensor out there is not as important to us as the system that operates it or the sensor packages that collects data. Okay, so we said, let's look at cybersecurity. How are we going to protect these things? How are we going to figure out how to enhance them, make them more efficient from a software perspective? And all of a sudden, our government sponsor said, yeah, we want to know more about that. So, hey, we were in the UAV business. So we started a program that was funded, is funded, and in the name of the program is the Open Source Unmanned Remote and Autonomous Vehicle Systems Program. And the key there is open source and systems. So part of the program is to find, identify, help facilitate the development of open source components or technology solutions in any capacity that enhance the UAV marketplace. And I know there are different elements out there that are doing it. Our job is to pull them together. So, you know, our website, if you go and look at our website, you'll see a list of, you'll see our programs and what we're doing. And I would encourage, if somebody's out there, and I know there are a lot of people out there, we interact with a ton of people, but if they have a novel open source solution with regards to unmanned vehicles, let us know. Maybe we can help.
I know just the people for you. They are in St. Petersburg, Florida, They hosted a local Linux users group meeting. We went to their business site, and we found that their conference room in the center with offices and cubicles scattered around it was like a gallery of drones.
Yeah.
And this is their passion, their hobby, their shared passion. And the lug meeting degenerated quickly into a bunch of guys flying drones from the parking lot.
Well,
and very sophisticated ones. I mean.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, that's the beautiful thing about free and open source software is if you can imagine it, you can build it. And you're not doing it based on, I've got to have this return financially. That's not a limiting factor most times. We're dealing with people who simply are innovators, and you've got to be able to help shepherd them sometimes to provide, you know, again, let's go back to the pays it plays. You want to help them define the value of their solution and help them get to a market to where they can be compensated for it. But you know, it's a lot of what we do is like being an incubator, and we help connect the dots between the free software world, the hobbyist world, the academic world, and government clients, and not just DoD government. Like right now, as part of the UAV program, what we're doing is helping what's referred to as rural and underserved communities, law enforcement, emergency response. We break it into public safety, law enforcement, emergency response types, public service, which we see as critical infrastructure, your power companies, roads, bridges, water, environmental, and then public administration, which are more general civilian, you know, town, city, government entities. So part of one of our big programs right now is how do we take all the things that are out in the marketplace and identify the key factors that smaller communities can adopt, because you don't want them running out buying toys. And that's kind of turned into doing a lot of work with the FAA to help identify and respectfully adhere to their rules and regulations. Because one of our recent workshops, the whole theme of it was based on compliance. Someone who's a hobbyist or even a commercial entity, a real estate broker, or whatever, if he wants to go out and fly a UAV, that's really kind of his business. But if a law enforcement entity does, well, that's a whole different animal, because that's a public safety entity, and they have to adhere to the rules and regulations, and they have to keep in mind privacy issues, Fourth Amendment issues, search and seizure issues, and that's just, a lot of that is structure. So we help cover that and then move them into the platforms and the sensory packages. So you know how it is. It just kind of, you have mission creep, and that's to be expected. But that helps bring the whole cloth solution in. And we're constantly bringing the open source developers in and doing technology demonstrations and showing these people as law enforcement and emergency management stuff, as we're getting them up to speed, we're saying, here's a new vehicle or a sensor package that can do what you need done. So that's one of our projects.
Yeah, kind of the last thing. You guys are going all over the place. That I've noticed. This one's fun because it's so back room, so unglamorous, and that is your open source disaster recovery documentation management suite, which is kind of like, I look at that and the first thing I'm thinking is, no, the job is not finished until the paperwork is done. And that is something that I have this vision of this guy who's maybe the greatest sheriff in the world in some rural Mississippi county. And the hurricanes come through, and he and the guy from the fire and EMT people are sitting there saying, how the hell do we fill out all these FEMA forms? What's up with that? I mean, and these guys have, what? This is a sheriff's department has 4 people. You know what I'm saying? They're small.
But remember back in the day when the Linux was really moving into the desktop environment, and I remember being in a Linux world and joking with you about how unsexy it was to think that somebody had to go out there and craft the fonts.
Yes.
You know, okay, somebody had to do that. So it's a necessity, you know, of making the sausage. Well, after Hurricane Katrina that came through, and like you said, I lived down near the Gulf Coast, Mississippi Gulf Coast, and about 80, 90 miles from New Orleans. And Mississippi had a very structured response team that went in to do disaster recovery. And after you have a disaster come through, whether it's a hurricane or a tornado or anything, it could be a terrorism, you know, attack, and anything. The response, the rebuilding can only take place as fast as you can get the money from FEMA, which is in Washington, to the state, down to the local people, because you can start cleaning up, but you got to pay people to get things going. Most people don't understand that that's only half of the equation, because the other half of the equation is accounting for the monies that are spent so that it can go from the local to the state back to Washington. Because after, say you've got a disaster that came through and did $10 million or $100 million worth of damage, the feds will release a percentage of that money to get the thing started, but the local communities have to account. They have to keep up with the receipts, the documentation of all of that. Otherwise, at the end of the program, where they call closeout, if you can't come up with the receipts and account for the money, then the government's either going to claw it back, demand money back, or people start going to prison. And either one of those are not good, you know. So I was actually talking to one of the guys that was one of the heads of the recovery effort after Katrina, and we were talking about benefits of free and open source software. And he was telling me about this program that he had helped develop. And when I say program, I'm talking about process. So, you know, my little squirrel wheels start going around. And I said, man, I'd love to see this document management program that you've developed. And he handed me a 3-ring binder. And I said, well, where's the website? Oh, we do it all by hand. Well, opportunity. So here, what we've done is we've got some federal sponsors to pay to come in and take this process and basically digitize it, because, you know, document management is document management. It's just a matter of how you apply it. So we're building an open source documentation management suite that addresses the specific needs of disaster recovery. The model is we as taxpayers pay for the development once. It's put under an appropriate open source license. It's distributed via the web. And so we pay for it once, and then we can share it with any community. So hopefully this thing will roll out and be available you know, at least throughout the United States. And then the hard part was to get them to understand that the companies that come in, a lot of time they're accounting companies or accounting type entities come in and they do the paperwork. We're going to give it to them too. It's just another tool in their toolbox. I mean, our job is to kick these things off and to get an environment started and then encourage it, you know, and you can replicate that model over and over and over again.